These last days of December have suddenly come upon us, leaving a trail of wonderment at the prospect of a God who, without loss of divinity, dared to assume the burden of a broken world. He was moved by an incomprehensible depth of mercy and love, the manifestation of which has exceeded every expectation of deity we find in the ancient world. Christ chose to lay aside his majesty so that he might take on the misery of a fallen race. It is a sublime paradox, perfectly captured by that superb artist of the Catholic imagination, the poet Richard Crashaw, for whom there could be no end to the marvels wrought by God. He writes of God as follows: that glory's self should serve our griefs and fears, and free eternity submit to years. Or elsewhere he writes, O great little one, whose all-embracing birth lifts earth to heaven, stoops heaven to earth. That same paradox runs through Gerard Manley Hopkins, only this time from the vantage point of our Blessed Lady. She who gave God's infinity dwindled to infancy, welcome in womb and breast, birth and all the rest. Who among us has not felt some tremor of astonishment, of bliss even, that the Almighty and eternal God, in fashioning our salvation, should himself condescend to enter our world, that he should suffer himself to be wounded in every respect as a poor and helpless child, that the word spoken from all eternity should all at once find himself unable to speak a word. The God who nailed the universe into place should have to learn how to pick up a hammer and drive a nail, thanks to a poor carpenter man named Joseph. Can there be anything more staggering than that? This is what comes to my mind in these last days of December. All the awful ironies of God. No sooner have we dug ourselves out from under an avalanche of toys and gifts, the happy detritus of the holiday season, and there we are, staring straight ahead into the grave of poor Stephen, the first martyr of the church. How quickly we have come from the crib to the cross. In a single shattering moment, we have gone from the quaintness of a stable to the grotesquerie of a stoning. And then, in another and still more violent dislocation, we see the slaughter of the holy innocents, their helpless cries cruelly silenced by the hatred of Herod, who will stop at nothing in his effort to destroy the child. And then, the very next day, we commemorate the butchery of Archbishop Becket at the altar of his own cathedral in Canterbury, England. Finally, of course, at week's end, there is the example of the holy Sylvester, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope of the Universal Church. He too will suffer martyrdom for Christ. And let us not forget Jesus himself, who will shed the blood of his circumcision, that being a foretaste of the much bloodier passion to follow. The church is a wise mother. She cares for her children, but not at the expense of telling them lies. She lets us know that life is hedged about by death, that the helpless child we see in Bethlehem's crib has come to die on Calvary's hill, his spirit meanwhile descending into the silence and the shame of Sheol. The saints know this, but we, cosseted in holiday cheap cheer, we prefer not to notice. As Pascal puts it, we run heedlessly into the abyss after putting something in front of us to prevent our seeing it. Isn't this because most of us, when faced with the unpleasantness of death, we resolve, in order to remain happy, not to think about it? And so our lives, distracted from distraction by distraction, as T.S. Eliot puts it in 4 quartets, our lives are driven implacably toward the very thing we fear. How like the Christmas season, so adroitly arranged by an ironical God to set things straight, who forces each moment, as it were, to a point of crisis, a judgment concerning the whole of our existence, not merely as creatures condemned to die, but as creatures invited to follow Christ into death, so that we might rise again in Easter triumph. This is the logic implicit in that sequence of feasts, which seem so incongruously to follow upon the laughter of Christmas morn. And so let us invoke the prayer and protection of these end of December saints: Stephen, Sylvester, Thomas of Becket, the Holy Innocents. All shed their blood for Christ. Happy New Year.